time
Boy.
zone trick.
All right, I'm recording this now, so I'll have a copy of this for you. You could do something with the audio. You can cut it up and use it for your social media, or you can do it any way you want. So once it's done, I'll get it to you.
Sounds good.
All right, it's almost 6 o'clock. It is now 6 o'clock. We're going to start the party. You ready for it?
Ready to go.
Everybody come on in, man. Here we go. We're admitting people now. Hold on, brother.
You'll appreciate my ongoing marketing efforts. I got this plastered everywhere.
I like it. We're getting everybody in, man. Everybody's coming in. Hold on, hold on. All right, all right. Everybody's coming in. Everybody's coming in. Let's go, let's go. Admit. All right, everybody's in. Okay. All right, let me just move this down and welcome everybody. This is the American Marketing Association and yours truly in my classes having our fall special speaker series. And I'm happy that Kyle Hegarty will be our first speaker. He's the author of the book, The Accidental Business Nomad. You see it on the screen, a survival guide for working across a shrinking planet. Because I teach global marketing, I keep my eyes open for books or people that might help make conversation in my classes more interesting. And so I discovered Kyle on a podcast talking about the new book. I bought it, I finished it in a day. And I reached out to him and he graciously agreed to talk to us. And not only was the book full of great stories, it was funny, it's smart, memorable characters like Texas Joe and Smitty. But in every chapter, he has these memorable lessons in the survival guide. He calls them tips that he includes every chapter. So, and that makes the book extra special. Now, special price to Westchester students today, $2.99. That is cheaper than a mocha latte at the Starbucks.
Way
so
cheaper.
Come on, improve your careers and take advantage of that special deal that Gabby posted. If you need it, email me. I'll make sure you get that price. It's a great book. Read it. And now, don't forget, students, I know you want those extra credit points. There's an attendance quiz in D2L. It's live from 6:15 to 7 o'clock. The answer is T for true. So make sure you take that quiz and get the bonus points that I promised you for attending. But remember, I'm taping this right now, so if you take the quiz and leave, I see you. Without further ado, Kyle Hegarty, take it away.
Thank you so much. You guys have a rock star professor here, and greetings. I'm coming from Singapore, which is about 12 hours away, so time zone wise. So it's just at 6 a.m. here. So if I'm looking a little bit like I'm waking up, it's because I am. We've got a rainy day, so the sun will start rising shortly behind me. But I want to dive right into this. And again, thank you, Tom, for setting this up. The reason you've got that $2.99 offer is because of your professor. He somehow managed to get Hachette, one of the biggest publishing companies on the planet. They do all the Harry Potter stuff. He got them to bring the price from like $15 down to $3. So kudos to you for that. Just going to keep admitting people in as they go. And if Tom, if you can keep admitting them in, just so
I will. I'll do the admitting.
Fantastic. So let's get into this. I've got a ton of stuff to talk to you guys about leading with a global mindset. This big idea that I've got is that companies, organizations have gone global, but people really have not. And what I want to talk to you today is about the communication challenges that pop up And these things happen over and over again. And let me just give you an example, a case study, if you will. It's a U.S., call it a U.S. company, construction company, won this bid to build roads and bridges in this small island nation of Western Samoa. This is actually true, true story. They won the deal and they sent a bunch of American project managers over to oversee the project. They hired a bunch of locals to build and do the road work. U.S. manager at the middle of the project, maybe towards the end of the project, this thing didn't go well. The communication challenges were evident from day one. And here's one example of what happened. U.S. manager said, listen, to a local employee, said, I want you to fill up this truck with garbage, all the rubbish and leftover junk. Take it to the dump and just burn everything. Does that make sense? That was his instructions. Now, I've got the chat tool open. If anybody's awake, or if you've, I don't know if you guys do like Zoom drinking games or anything.
No, I don't think
I'd be very curious. Be very
I don't
curious.
think so.
Oh, well, yeah, right. Question in the chat tool, maybe an extra credit. What happened? In other words, the instruction from this American manager said, I want you to put everything into the truck, take all this junk away, take it to the dump, burn everything. What happened? Anybody? Can we give any more extra credit? He burned the truck, says Jenny Klein. Jenny Klein, congratulations. You are absolutely right. That's exactly what happened. So thank you, Jenny, for being the first to join in. The truck, everything was burned. That was the instruction that was given. This is a truck on fire moment. And you might think this sounds kind of crazy, but this stuff happens all the time. In some cases, it's literal situations like this, but in many more, it's situations like misunderstood communication, instructions. You know, let's say we're building a software, you know, is this going to be done on time? And the person says, yes, it's going to be done on time. And then it's not nearly done on time because nobody knows what's going on. What often happens is in a global environment, people from, or managers or leaders from one part of the world show up, they bring their working styles, their communication styles, their assumptions of how things should get done. They bring that in and they cause more of a mess than they actually end up fixing. This happens at the biggest tech companies. This happens in any industry. This stuff happens every single day. And I have this name for these types of managers. We call them seagulls. And seagulls are these big, goofy birds that seem to fly in from out of nowhere. They land, they make a ton of noise, they mess up everything, they crap all over the place, and then they fly away. And if you think about global business or global companies, this type of seagull management and seagull leadership is one of the big problems that happens. I was telling Tom before we started, I did a similar talk on this just yesterday with a bunch of, it was an industry group with about 30 people. And we did a poll. I said, how many of you have seagulls in your organization? And it was 100% who said yes. If you walk out of this session today and can understand the truck on fire situation, if you can understand the seagull situation, you will be in better shape than 90+% of the people out here today managing teams globally. It's not all easy to do, but this is a really good starting point. And that's why I wrote the book. I wrote the book to help people fast forward through these learning processes. And there's kind of a classic learning path, learning structure. This is not my idea, but I've applied it into like a global framework, which is this, you know, how we go and learn about a new idea. And that's step one, is really that where you just don't know anything. You don't know what you don't know. You are a blissfully ignorant seagull in this case. Step two is really important. It's that moment where you go, wait a minute, what I'm doing is not working. Something's different here. I don't know what it is, but something's going on here. And that's a really important step to make. And I can tell you there are people here in Singapore who make hundreds of thousands of dollars a year who have not made this step yet. But it's really important. That second step, you don't know what you don't know, or at least you realize now what you don't know. We need to get to the third step, which is to say, okay, now that I understand this stuff's different here, what can I do differently to adjust? How can I experiment with new ideas? How can I test things? I know we've got a lot of people who focus on marketing in this call today. All of a sudden, you can bring your product or service to a new market, and it's not taking off the same way. Why? Well, we've got to be open to new approaches, new messaging ideas. And then you get to this, sometimes very few of us end up in this fourth stage, which would be mastery, which is you, in a Zoom world that we're all in, you can go from a call with your team in Singapore to your team in Russia, to your team in the United States, to your team in Brazil and Mexico, and you can zig and zag and adapt on the fly without even thinking about it. I know very few people on this planet who have achieved that from a global communication standpoint. I try and write about one of them, this guy Axel, because I think he comes close to that. And I think he was a really good character to take a look at as somebody to try and get to that fourth stage. So anyway, what I want to do here is talk to you, we're here to talk about communication at a high level. And if there's a couple of ideas I'd like to just start planting these seeds with, you've probably heard of the golden rule, which is treat people the way you want to be treated, which is generally a pretty good rule, I think. I think it goes back to, I think that's a biblical thing. I'm going to ask you to throw that out. Treat people the way you want to be treated. If you're going to get into an international work environment, my first bit of advice is to throw this rule away. And I'm not trying to be sacrilegious or whatever. I don't want to be controversial here. It's a very simple change, but very hard to do. I want you to treat people the way they want to be treated. And this is probably something that, yeah, exactly. Thank you, Caleb. You're right. Treat people the way they want to be treated. And this is not even an international thing. This is a people thing. It sounds like a simple idea, but it's one that I wish I understood and thought about when I started out 5 years ago when I was 22. No, I'm just kidding. I'm a little bit older than that. But I wish that I had spent more time thinking about this. And it's not an easy thing to think about because it requires two different things. One, you need to know your styles. How do you communicate? What are your preferences? How do you work? And then you need to be able to read people and think about what is it that they want? What motivates them? What demotivates them? And over the years, I've learned, and there's a ton of research out there, that the stuff that motivates me can completely demotivate somebody else. One quick example is incentives from put it into a business context, bonus structure. What incentivizes me is individual bonus stuff. So leave me alone, let me get to it, give me a bonus if I hit my tasks or if I hit my goals, right? Well, turns out in some parts of the world, if you throw that type of structure in place with a team, it can collapse on itself because people don't get inspired or incentivized that way. They might instead be incentivized more to do stuff as a group. In fact, an individual incentive scheme or plan might be almost offensive or to the point where people deliberately don't do well because they do not want to be singled out. And this happens quite frequently. This is kind of interesting stuff. The challenge here is that a lot of this stuff is invisible. All these things that I'm talking about, I'm talking about like working styles. And this is very difficult to oftentimes get our head around. By the way, this is called the platinum rule in the cross-cultural world. I'll give you a couple of book recommendations aside from mine at the end of this, which get into some of these ideas in more detail. But what I want to talk about is working styles. And to me, this is invisible stuff. Oftentimes, people think that language is what gets in the way of working across cultures or across different parts of the world. And no question that plays a factor here. But interestingly enough, the highest failure rate for expat assignments, actually, I'll open this up to a guess. Anyone want to guess the two countries where the expat assignment rates fail the most, the highest failure rate? And this would be based on percentage, not on absolute numbers. What two countries with their expat, when they send an expat or somebody goes to their country, what are the two countries that have the highest failure rate? Any guesses? No bad guesses here because it's a weird one. Hopefully the question's clear. So in
Maybe
other
like,
words, if you, I'm sorry.
I was just gonna say like the UK.
Yeah, that's exactly it. The UK, the US and the UK have the highest expat assignment failure rates. And a lot of people have looked into this to try and figure out. Thank you. It's good that you nailed it. By the way, the experts who I was talking to yesterday, nobody got that one. So the thing that they think is causing this is the fact that we both speak English and we go into an environment and we assume, because everyone's speaking English, we assume everything else is the same as well. We assume the underlying invisible stuff is the same. If an American, I'm American, if you go to Japan, you know immediately you are in a different part of the world. Everything, sights, sounds, everything looks different and your guard is up. But you tend to let your guard down if the language is something that's the same. So that's what they think is why there's so many failure rates across the UK. My wife is British, so I've got about 15 years of cross-cultural experimentation stories on that one. The working styles that I want to talk to you about, the invisible stuff. Here's a couple of examples: how people communicate, how people lead teams, how people get incentivized. I gave you that example already. How we build relationships varies across the world. How we manage people, how we deal with clients, how we think about marketing campaigns could also be another one. All of this stuff is invisible. However, if you can measure it, or if you can start to measure it, you can manage it. And this is where it gets interesting, because there is decades of research that has looked into all of these things that I'm talking about, all of these headaches, all of these challenges about working across cultures. It's not just me, and it's not just a 2020 problem or a problem like this century. This has been going on for a long time. Really, since the end of World War II, behavioral psychologists have been looking at all of these styles that I'm showing you on this slide. They've been studying this across cultures, across the planet. They'll ask survey questions saying, how do you like to communicate? Or they'll kind of study this. How do you manage people? They'll look at how companies are organized in China versus the United States, in Mexico versus Canada. All of, my data sets include about 85 countries, but I know that there are bigger data sets that have closer to 180 countries studied. This is all macro data, so we have to be careful about it, but I want to show you that data in a couple of seconds, or at least some of the examples from that. Throw 2020 into the mix here, and everything gets even harder, because now we're all doing this on Zoom. So you got your classes on Zoom, but everybody's in this dumpster fire of a year, right? We don't get the same body language. We can't. It's difficult to read all of this stuff, especially nuanced body language. We don't get the informal interactions, the water cooler chats, or the conversations in the elevator, which turns out to actually make a very big difference. Hierarchies in organizations. All of a sudden, if you come from a strict hierarchy where you just are supposed to do what the boss tells you, well, okay, fine, but now all of a sudden you're working from home and you're talking to your boss 5 minutes a day or 5 minutes a week. How does that work? If you're not used to that level of autonomy, what does that change mean? And so about 1 billion people are trying to figure this out right now. Tons of stress, stuff that we don't even know about, right? Everybody's got challenges, it's economic uncertainty, social isolation. All of this adds to more pressure. My point here is that in an international or global team context, all of this stuff matters and makes the challenges, the traditional challenges, even harder. So, tons of stuff here, but let me just show you some of the data. And I'm going to talk through this very quickly. I usually spend a day with executives going through this. I'm going to walk you through it in about 10 minutes. And so don't get too caught up on all of the details here. What I want you to take away from this is just a starting point idea of this invisible stuff that behavioral psychologists are trying to measure. Because if we can understand different styles, we can hopefully come up with creative ideas to bridge them. That's what I focus on. That's what I'm trying to do with corporates. I've talked about communicating. There is what's called direct communication and indirect communication. You've probably heard of this terms, phrasing before. Direct communication, Americans are traditionally direct communicators. We say it like it is. We get to the point. You don't have to read between the lines. A majority of the planet is not like that. And I'll give you a very quick, weird example. 2 weeks ago, I'm doing a project with a American company, but they've got an office in Taiwan. And I'm talking to this guy in Taiwan before our session started, Zoom session. I'm sitting here in this room, and he and I are chatting. We have a kind of catching up on stuff. We go, okay, right, we'll come back in like 5 minutes and we'll start. And I go off and I do some stuff, and I come back. And before the meeting started, he said to me, he goes, he's very kind of quiet. He said, what kind of microphone do you use? I said, well, I've got this microphone here. He's like, it's a really good microphone. That's a really strong and good microphone. I said, okay, thank you. Kind of weird, but okay. And I do my event. And later in the day, I'm thinking about this because I know this guy was telling me something. This is an indirect communicator. He was telling me something. And then it occurred to me during that 5-minute break, I didn't mute. Tom already knows where this is going. I didn't mute my microphone. And right across the hallway is my bathroom. I won't get into the details, but I am fairly certain he was telling me basically, why don't you mute your microphone when we go on these breaks, because we don't need to hear what you're doing in the background. That is an example of indirect communication and the need to be able to read between the lines and pick up on these nuances. Weird example, but that's what you get. That's my 2020 strange indirect communication example. Sometimes you'll see this phrased as low context, which is direct communicators. The behavioral psychologists like to put complicated phrasing wherever they can, right? So you can even, some of you look carefully, you'll see I've written over some of this to change it to direct. So you can see there's that. You'll see this bounce around, but direct communication is also considered low context. Indirect communication is high context. How we give feedback differs across the world and across individuals. How we lead teams, I talked about this already. There's very hierarchical structures in some parts of the world. There's very flat structures. I get into this a lot in the book because I think that this actually is one of the invisible things that catches people up a lot. How decisions get made, top-down versus consensus-driven. Is it one big boss who makes all the calls? Or does everything have to get into a group? Everybody's got to be on the same page before they move forward. How we build trust. This is marketing right here. Task-based cultures are ones where I don't need to like you. But if you get the job done and you're talented and you know what you're doing and you're accountable, we'll work just fine together. But in some parts of the world, that's unheard of. That's just not how business is done. It's more important to build the relationship first. We've got to go out and have dinner and have lunch 20 times. Got to go got to go get drunk, you know, like all these kind of stuff that is expected sometimes to do. And it's very difficult to navigate these because you'll see Americans are going to score as a very task-based business culture versus other parts of the world. That causes misunderstanding quite frequently. How we deal with confrontation. Personally, I like a good confrontation. I like to yell it out and kind of, you know, hash stuff out. But that terrifies some people and it doesn't work in some parts of the world. That's the concept, if you've ever heard the phrase losing face, right? You don't want to embarrass somebody because they could be that could be taken, you know, as a shameful act in some places. And you can lose an entire relationship by one wrong phrase. There are some parts of the world that avoid confrontation and solve problems more through like back channels. I'll give you examples of that later. Time. Some cultures are on time, some are flexible time, which is kind of a nice, polite way of saying that they always show up late. My biggest clients for the last couple of years have been German and Swiss companies. You better believe we start on time. I flew from Zurich to Delhi a year or two ago, and I think our event in Delhi started an hour late, which was just about on time based on what their expectation was. Different parts of the world. You gotta roll with it. Now, I should probably give a trigger warning here. We have to be a little bit careful. I'm talking in very big generalizations, and we have to acknowledge that. And we have to be very careful with generalizations. This is macro data captured from hundreds of thousands of individuals in different countries. This is not saying that everybody is like this in one part of the world. This is not trying to stereotype. What we're trying to do is to get a data-driven understanding of trends. Because if we can understand those trends, then we can at least try and work to better build relationships. I think that's a very important point. So I want to, and I'm guilty sometimes of slipping into kind of overgeneralizing situations. So we all have to be aware of this. By the way, what you're looking at is a data set from a professor out of INSEAD. Her name is Erin Meyer. Most of this isn't her data. She's using data from other sources as well, but I think she's done a very good job doing a data visualization. So here's the United States. Here's how we Americans score on these invisible things. Really quickly, what you're looking at is that we are very direct, but here at the top part, if you ever want to know why one reason why Americans are so confusing to the rest of the world, it's because we're very direct until we start giving feedback. And what tends to happen is we start becoming more indirect. We don't want to sound too harsh. I don't know if you've been taught the sandwich approach, but you say something nice, you give your feedback, and then you say something nice again. That's fine if you understand that and the audience member understands that. But most of the world wasn't brought up that way. So when Americans are coaching or managing or leading teams, that causes chaos like you wouldn't believe. Turns out Americans generally are egalitarian compared to hierarchical. Again, this will be relative to the rest of the planet, kind of in the middle from the top down. Incredibly task-based in terms of how we approach business. This is going to come into play in big chunks of the world. Kind of hedge on our confrontation, and we're pretty time sensitive. Let's throw up another. Here's my British friends. Here's my wife's home country, UK. So you can see they're a little bit more in the middle on a lot of these spectrums. And again, I will kind of put a little bit of a asterisk here. We have to be careful. This doesn't mean every British person falls into this. This does not mean Americans automatically fit into this. This is macro data. Let's throw another part of the world. Here's my adopted country here in Singapore. All of a sudden, now you're seeing some gaps. And when we talk about communication challenges across cultures, let's throw up some more of Southeast Asia. Here's Indonesia. Malaysia, here's India and Thailand. Uh, you don't need to be a rocket scientist to visually see that there are some very big differences. This is an east-west communication challenge and business challenge. And this is the stuff that I'm spending most of my time working on. I'm only giving you data between the United States and Southeast Asia today as a starting point. But I thought you could, this is a good, fun point to go, whoa. the, the data sets clearly show some pretty big differences in terms of how people communicate, how they give feedback, how they think about hierarchy, how they have more of a top-down leadership structure, how relationship building is so much more, or it's perceived in very different ways in this part of the world. Confrontation avoidance. So, you get in and you want to do you want to brainstorm ideas by challenging somebody's stuff, right? You want to have an open conversation. Sometimes that doesn't work, and what it often will result in is silence. And silence, of course, doesn't really help. So we want to be able to avoid that. And the people who have global mindsets, who can communicate across cultures, in many ways, they kind of think about this stuff in their heads, and then they think about ways to adjust. So I work with teams, and we can build these maps based on anywhere, which is kind of cool. So you could say, I want to see what, give me the United States, Mexico, and France, because that's where my team is based, or that's where my offices are based. And we can pull that, and then we can sit back and go, okay, let's look at each of these line by line and see, what are we learning from here? We're here to talk about communication, so maybe I'll get into that in more detail. I'm going to move on to some other concepts here, but I'll take a quick pause just to see if anybody has any comments, questions. I know we've got a Q&A officially towards the end, but if you wanted just to put in any chat right now, and I'm really doing this just so I can have some coffee. Give people a minute to think about things. You can get this map is from Aaron Meyer wrote a book called Culture Map. It's good because it gets into the data. I think that one of the reasons I wrote my book was because I felt like a lot of the cross-cultural business books weren't very realistic. I thought that the examples were a little bit not academic. I felt like they were kind of made up, or like they were made to fit the answer that they were looking for rather than realistic situations. And so I thought I'd kind of throw some curveball stories in just to see, because sometimes this doesn't check out. This is macro data, right? You can only use it for some stuff. It's a starting point. It's a best first guess to get a sense as to what these differences are all about. I'll give you a quick marketing story before I go on, just because I'm thinking about it. You think about like hierarchy and how different parts of the world from a marketing perspective deal with hierarchy, and power distance is what it's often referred to as. So power distance, higher power distance cultures, ones with more hierarchy, tend to show their power visually in the form of like jewelry and cars. So I every day I will see a Lamborghini. I don't know if that happens in your neck of the woods, but on a daily basis, the one we saw yesterday, it was a Lotus, and it was bright pink with a giant like pink bear painted on the side of it. It was kind of like a beautiful car that had been ruined. I don't, so there's tons of these, and the point is that in certain parts of the world, this kind of thing is much more common, and marketers for decades have used this exact data set to decide where and how they are going to promote their products. When you fly into Beijing, when you fly into airports in the Middle East, you are bombarded with the most high-end watch advertisements, the high-end liquor. They sell pens, you know, and these are pens that are tens of thousands of dollars for some reason people need to. I don't think they're selling my Casio F9, WF9, F9W, something. My $10 Casio watch, that's not what they're looking at. When you fly into the UK, there's a big goofy guy with a beefeater hat and he's, oh, welcome to the UK. Like, they're not advertising the same stuff. And there are marketing teams that are doing that based on data that says that there's consumption habits vary in different parts of the world. And then they can also adjust the look and feel of that message based on where they are. They use this data to decide how to promote things in different parts of the world. And they've been doing that. I know that they were one company, one ad firm was using this data in the early 80s to do that. So this is not new stuff. Okay, let me give you one deep dive example of what we could do. So let's talk about communication. Two of the most confusing words on the planet are yes and no. And I gave an example earlier of like running a software program. You know, is this project going to be done on time? You know, Professor Tom goes, "Hey, are you getting this assignment in on time?" Yes, and it doesn't come in. Do you understand what I just said? Yes. This stuff happens all the time, especially in cross-cultural teams, and oftentimes, yes doesn't always mean yes, and no doesn't always mean no as well. One of the problems here is that, and by the way, sometimes if you were to ask somebody in a place like Indonesia or India, is this going to be, or do you have any questions? It's considered rude to say no. So you can't ask a closed-ended question, or you shouldn't ask a closed-ended question. And this is what I want to get at, which is how an example of how you could actually adjust your working style at a communication level. If you are communicating with people or with somebody who comes from more of an indirect style, who might be uncomfortable directly responding, why would you ask a closed-ended question? Because a closed-ended question is asking for either a yes or no. A majority of the planet, 70, 80% of the planet doesn't communicate the way we do in the United States. And so the first bit of advice is get rid of closed-ended questions. And that's a really difficult thing to do if that's how you were brought up. Get rid of them. Yes and no. It's kind of an interesting one. So here's how I would say you could adjust for a situation where you might want to think about communicating with people in who may have different communication styles. Forget cultures. Let's just talk about people who have different communication styles. Be on the lookout for words like can. Can you get this done? That's a closed-ended question. All of these words steer you towards a closed-ended question. Do you understand? Does that make sense? I'm asking you for a yes or no here. Are we clear? Is there any question? You know, you know, all of these things, right? These are all steering us. So we want to be on the lookout for that. And you want to think about actually getting those out of your vocabulary. Consider replacing them with things, we call it softer. For a number of years, I had printed on my desk in big font, "I wonder if," and that's how I started changing my conversation. I would say, "I wonder if we should walk through the next steps so we all understand what happens next," rather than me saying, "I've just explained this to you. Does this make sense? I wonder if before we wrap up, you could just walk me through what happens next." This might sound completely obvious to you, but most people don't do it. And this is where a lot of these communication problems start. And as I had mentioned, if you can crack this one, I'm interested in hiring those people. And a lot of other companies are interested in that. That's the skill set that we need, right? This is the stuff that we need to get to. Step two, let's say that we want to really nail down a relationship and be able to communicate effectively, rather than asking about this software that's being, let's say we've got a software project to do next week. We're trying to avoid, does this make sense, right? Is this going to be done by next Friday? Well, I wonder if we should walk through the next steps before we wrap up today. And let me tell you why. Let me give you an example of this, because about 6 months ago, we did this other project and we all thought everything was clear, but then on the day of delivery, it turned out that one side was coding the stuff one way and another team was miscoding, and it didn't work, and it set the project back by 6 months, and it cost us a ton of money, and we lost the client. I don't want that to happen, and that's why I'd like you to walk me through this. I call this calibrated storytelling, which is a way to further soften the situation. And Caleb has just asked, can you do this by altering the tone of your voice? The tone of your voice makes a massive difference. That's a really, really good point. Oftentimes, indirect communication is tone-based. Chinese language is a tonal language. I mean, it's entirely determined by the tone of your voice, which is very different than English. So to answer your question, yes, you can adjust the tone of your voice. My experience is that that often will play a massive difference. I think you probably want to take it one step further. It depends on the situation, but yeah, I think that's a really good point, Caleb. That's very, very important. So anyway, getting back to step two, I would just add a tiny little explanation as to what you're intending to do here. This is a really good way to drive additional clarity to what you're trying to communicate. Let me give you an example. Step three, I call this ultimate active listening. Active listening is like this really cool, simple tool where you just say back a word, but in the form of a question. You paraphrase or rephrase something. So if somebody says, yeah, that was, things are pretty good. Well, when you say pretty good, just can you elaborate on that? Right? All of a sudden, pretty good can turn into a very different discussion, but it's up to you to ask a little bit deeper. What I use active listening for in this scenario is, and I've already said it, but before we wrap up, I think it would help if you could walk me through the next steps. Almost play it back. Could we just quickly play back what you just heard, just to make sure stuff is crystal clear? And I'm flying through this, but if we were to apply this into our burning truck scenario at the beginning of this conversation, how would you coach that project manager to change his or her communication style? Well, I would say, because what he did, I think it was he, I don't know, probably he, I don't know. He had initially said, put all the stuff in the truck, take it to the dump, burn everything. Does that make sense? Well, now all of a sudden, with our new global thoughts here, we go, well, wait a minute. He just asked one of those closed-ended questions. This guy's asking for trouble. I wonder if you could help by putting all this stuff in here, take it off to the dump, burn everything. Now, can you, before you do it, I wonder if you could help me here, and let me tell you why, because we've had situations throughout this whole project where things have been misunderstood. I don't want that to happen here. So would you mind just quickly walking me through how you're planning on doing this, just so we're clear and make sure that nobody goes the wrong direction, right? It's a simple way, and to Caleb's point, the tone. It would be to work on practicing that tone adjustment across the board. I know this might sound like, maybe this sounds basic, maybe this sounds kind of weird, but man, for leaders of teams or team members at any age or level, for them to understand this basic stuff of communication, this is a really powerful starting point. If I'm thinking about students and you're trying to think about your job career, let me talk a little bit about interviewing, and then we'll go to Q&A here. I know we're going to wrap at the end of the hour. Here's a couple questions or things to think about. Like if you are looking for opportunities that are global in nature, a couple questions that you could ask, like, or think about what kind of questions you could ask in an interview. You are an MNC, you know, how would you describe your company's communication style? That's a really cool question to ask. Or be prepared to answer that. How do you communicate? I did a project with LinkedIn actually at the beginning of this year, and she was the project manager. She nailed it. Our first meeting, she said, "By the way, how do you like to communicate?" That's a fantastic question. And if you think about it, it's a difficult one to answer if you haven't spent the time thinking about your style, your preferences, what makes you tick, what you don't like. But you want to be able to answer that. If I'm interviewing people and a young, you know, person coming up from school has put the time to think about their styles and who has that wherewithal to understand that other people are different and they think about the platinum rule, treat people the way they want to be treated. If I can get that sense from somebody I'm talking to, that person's on the top of the list, because most of what we do is communication based these days, right? So these are some questions that I would say go away and think about this stuff, because this makes a big difference. Or if you're looking for an international gig or something that's global, are there personal examples when you've encountered different cultures, and you know, what have you learned from that? Maybe you haven't traveled. Maybe you don't have a passport. Fine, doesn't matter. What have you seen, right? You've got this thing called the internet, right? Like what shows have you watched that were eye-opening to you? One show I would recommend, which I think is a really interesting one from a global business context, is what was it called? The Factory on Netflix. This thing was a documentary about a Chinese company that took over an American factory in the Midwest. I don't know if anybody's seen it, but it walks through a year in the life of both the Americans, who all of a sudden had these new Chinese bosses, and then it looked at the Chinese bosses who came in trying to manage the Americans. I like it because I thought it did a very good job of showing both sides, how both sides perceived each other, and the misunderstandings that were happening on a daily basis. So that to me was a really accurate portrayal of what happens when cultures collide in a work setting. So that could be something just to start, you know, take a look at that and start thinking about it, because I can tell you, my wife's a scientist, and her colleagues who are interviewing in different parts of the world, when they're interviewing for roles these days, they're not being asked science questions anymore. They're being asked behavioral communication questions. That's the name of the game. Companies are changing very quickly to this because they're realizing that this is what it's all about. Being able to communicate, persuade ideas, being able to adapt to different styles. So I'm a believer in all of this stuff, and I think it's really important. If you wanted some case studies, this is another way to think about it. Here, you're being interviewed for a job at an MNC for a role in a global team. The interviewer asks you, what differences do you see between American working styles and other parts of the world? And what similarities? How would you even think about answering that? It's a tough question, but it's an important question. And maybe you could fall back to the data set that I just showed you, right? You could say, well, you know, as a student, I haven't worked in a cross-cultural team yet. However, I've read this excellent book called The Accidental Business Nomad, and I've read Aaron Meyer's work, who looks at this cross-cultural data, and what the data says is that these communication styles exist, and so it's important to overcome that. Blah, 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 blah. But like, these are things that I would think about. If we wanted to put it in a marketing context, let's say you've invented this cool product, goes gangbusters in the US. How would you even think about it if you put a culture lens up to this? before you expand it overseas, what questions should you be thinking about from a marketing perspective? How could this thing go wrong? How might you change the message? And you're probably not going to know the answer because there's how many, whatever, 200 countries in the world. There's a lot of moving pieces, but it's up to you to figure out how you're going to get those answers, right? So these are kind of very high level starting point ways that I would think about prepping for more of a internationally focused career path. I mentioned a couple books. This is the Culture Map. This is Erin Meyer's work. She's the professor I had mentioned. Good read. This is her data set that I showed you, she does a good data visualization. I don't know if you've heard of this guy. I can't pronounce his name, but he wrote this book called The Culture Code. He's an advertising guy, and he does work where he brings people in, and it's like almost the Mad Men stuff where they'll bring like a group of people in and they try and get a read on their reactions to different things. And he's done this for groups around the planet. And what he was finding was that people in different parts of the world responded to the same product in very different ways. So take a car, for example. You'll notice if cars, the way they advertise cars in the United States is very different than how they advertise a car in parts of Europe. And it's very different than how they would advertise a car in China. Quick example is in the US, oftentimes you get the truck, it's outside, it's in like a desert, it's in this big expansive space. Maybe somebody's camping. There's kind of hints that somebody's having sex, quite frankly, because that's very much connected. And they've made connections between this in the United States. They found that just nobody cares in Germany. The same ad in Germany is a close-up of the engine. And if you were to take that ad of the guys in the desert and put that into China, the Chinese audience generally would look at that by saying you're advertising this for peasants, because our thing is we want to get away from big space and the empty deserts. We want to be in the city. We want to have more of an urban lifestyle experience. So anything with like the rugged outdoorsman, that falls very flat in a market there. Same product, very different approach to how you take that to market and the message and the look and feel that you give to it. And so he goes into detail on that. I think it's kind of a fun book to take a look at. I obviously recommend this book as well. $2.99, can you believe it? Only Tom could pull that off. I don't know how he got that done, but that, ladies and gentlemen, is my presentation. It's we've got a couple minutes left, so I'll open it up to Q&A. Tom, I'll let you unmute and questions, anything you want to go for.
I think people can unmute themselves. I did get a few questions, but before we go on further, I also took a DISC analysis over the summer, Kyle, and you referenced it. And I really feel it's important that you learn that, or you take that. The younger, the better. That you know those things. And so,
I did a whole chapter, or like on DISC. It's one of the more basic behavioral models. Very simple. It's a 4-quadrant model. Again, like any model, it's not. There's a great quote that says, "No models are correct, but some are helpful." Something like that. I think DISC is a perfect example of that, where I find it so helpful. It basically would suggest that it's a great way to help you understand where you actually might fall from your behavior preferences. Are you direct? Are you confrontational? Are you competitive? Or are you more outgoing? Are you more social? Do you want to talk about big ideas? Or are you quiet? Do you want to hear from others first? Do you want to make sure everybody is in agreement before we move together? Or do you just want to focus on the numbers? Keep it black and white. Make an assessment based on that. There's no right or wrong answer, but the DISC assessment helps point you to say, okay, actually, based on the way you've answered these questions, we think that you fall closer to this category. And it goes right back to that idea, which is, think about yourself, think about you, um, think about you, which, Tom, that's a Guns N' Roses song right there. Think about you.
Yeah.
It's a inside joke. Um, think about yourself, and then think about ways to read the person that you are with or you are working with, and think about ways to adjust. So a lot of my time is spent doing disc profiles for people. I've got a free assessment if anybody wants it. I also do like most of it's done third party. I think it's about 50 US dollars a test, but you get a 30-page report. So if you're super lazy and you want somebody else to tell you what your style is, spend 50 bucks or whatever it is to take a thorough test, and you'll get a 30-page report, and that'll be probably a easy way to answer any of those tough interview questions.
Well, the one thing that I learned, and it was a real blind spot, 3 jobs, which, because I like people, I trust them. And that was the report clearly stated that is danger. And it happened to me. And man, that's been a problem. So it also has that side. You learn where your weak points are, your blind spots.
Massively. It's, one of the things that I think is important about DISC is that there's no right or wrong answer, but it helps open up and have those. To me, I was the same way. It has these aha moments where you go, oh, yeah, I am a little bit disorganized when it comes to this stuff, and it's not to use that as an excuse. It's to say, okay, I know this is happening. I know I tend to be disorganized. I can be better. I need to put some additional focus on this. I know I tend to trust people too quickly, and I need to be a little bit more cautious about that. So to have that stuff, that's where experience starts building in and helping in business contexts and in personal life too. It's really helpful. It's a fun test.
It's really good because there's also the personal side to them. Anyway,
yeah.
Get the book, the Accidental Business Nomad. Come on, $2.99.
Come on.
I had some questions here. You've covered all of them except one.
Yep.
So this would be the last question. What does a student do if they want to work in a certain country? They've identified a place they want to start their careers internationally. What advice could you share?
So I'll give you my pre-COVID answer, which is go there. I have this joke. I kind of say my advice is to go away. Get there one way or the other. Find a way to study abroad. In some cases, if you can figure it out, I'll give you an example. In Vietnam right now is pretty hot, and there was a couple of people I was talking to. They're 25. They go, look, I've always liked Vietnam, and this was I guess this was 2019. She said, just go. If you're unemployed, go. Show up to Ho Chi Minh City and network your ass off. Use LinkedIn. Use whatever you've got. One thing that's cool is that expats are really tight. They help each other out, especially in markets that are emerging and that are a little bit off the grid. And so you show up, like you could send a note to a guy in Ho Chi Minh and say, hey, I'm interested in Vietnam. It's a lot different if you show up at his or her door. Now, 2020, not possible. So we've got to start small. You start by building your network. If you're not on LinkedIn, I probably sound like an old man here, but I still find that is the business networking platform. Put a profile up and start connecting with people who are sharing that type of interest, because that can help. My LinkedIn name is here. I'm happy to connect with anybody as well. Start reaching out. If you have a job, do the homework, find out what are there opportunities that you can get involved in. If you are a student, is there a project that you can steer to start getting into that specific country? Maybe I'm going to do a report. Maybe I was always interested in, I did a report when I was growing up on the Three Gorges Dam in China. They were building this biggest dam in the world. And I was kind of curious about China, so I did this report on it. And that got me started, right? It started planting seeds. And then I was interested in the East Asian financial crisis. And so, these are things that happened years before I moved here, but that kind of aimed me in the direction. So I would say it's all about the network building. That would be my biggest piece of advice. Generally speaking, expats like to help expats out. So find your network. American marketing associations, there are chambers of commerce, all of these things. If you're a student, I mean, people generally like to help. And look, not everyone's going to respond, right? This is a numbers game. It's like marketing. Maybe you have to reach out to 10 or 20 people to get a couple of responses, but in LinkedIn world, that's half hour of your life. So that's my advice.
Hold on a second. I think I got another question here.
Yep.
How do you lead a diverse group of individuals from all over the world? Does it help vocalizing expectations of how you should communicate, or could you help the group have a more consistent communication style across many different types of individuals?
It's a great question. So what you've got is sort of like a United Nations of a team, right? So people could be zigging and zagging all over those visual data graphs that I showed you. It's about creating almost a third culture. What's the culture of your team going to look like? And good global leaders are ones that identify that is going to be a problem early, and they have those conversations up front. On my website, in the back of the book, is a link that says, if you want more stuff, come to this page. One of them is a communications contract, and it's a template. I'm not into templates, but it's a good starting point to say, okay, everybody, let's get on a call. Let's look at this data. Let's talk about times where misunderstandings have happened in the past. Let's come up with agreements moving forward. What is our style about how are we going to handle our differences? What does confrontation look like? How are we going to keep each other, hold each other accountable? And so this template is, I think, a good starting point. And I recommend teams sit down and have that conversation and refresh it all the time. So that's a kind of a cool way to start that. And I think it's a really good, mature way for a leader to be able to take that and run with it quickly.
And there's places in the book, Kyle, where it's clear that would have helped at some points.
Absolutely.
Some of the stories. Anyway,
most of the time, we just rush into situations and we bring in what we're used to, and we kind of assume everybody else is going to think and behave the same way. And clearly that doesn't happen. So, part of the lesson is when you're rushing, slow down and use those kind of tools before you get yourself into trouble.
All right. Before we, close this down, is there one point you want us all to remember as we think back on this meeting?
I think it's really important to continually focus on that idea that you need to treat people the way they want to be treated. Use DISC, use culture data to think about what those invisible cues are that are, we all, somebody told me this once, we shed our styles. Is that what she said? Something like that. I think I put in the book. We shed our styles, meaning we're always giving off clues and hints as to what our preferences and our communication styles are. And so this is a chance to become attuned to picking up on that. Awesome. That would be my biggest starting point advice.
Well, thank you so much, Kyle. It was awesome.
Everybody
get a hold of this book. Come on, $2.99. It's ridiculous.
Hey, one final request. If you do buy it and read it, enjoy it, Amazon reviews are critically important, especially in 2020. I can't be in the States. I can't be out promoting this thing. So what helps is, throw a couple stars onto it. Even if you didn't like it, give a bad review is better than no review.
No, don't. Good reviews. Come on now. Come on, class. Remember how good this was. But I also want to say thanks to the American Marketing Association, our co-sponsor. I saw a number of the people in the group here, and please pay attention to the meetings they have. Gabby, Presidente, she appreciates it, and I know I do too. You'll also be a better marketer. So with that said, again, Kyle, thank you. Have a good day. I know it's starting out your day over here. We're on the other side getting ready to shut it down.
Sun's up.
Everybody,
I gotta go to work.
appreciate you being here tonight. Take care. See you later.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much.